you've been watching the channel for a while, you might remember around a year and a half ago I translated the map obelisks, which as it turns out was filled to the brim with Futhark. And in a similar sense, I've once more found another example of Futhark in the spirit calling bell within Elden Ring. The words and secrets hidden within these runes honestly almost blew me away as much as when I realised Mr. Beast is just another shit stain on the sidewalk. I'm not going to ask you to subscribe right now as I think that's a bit silly, but if you do end up enjoying the video, please consider leaving a like and subscribe as it greatly helps the channel. Without further ado, please sit back, relax, grab some succulent, juicy and sensational prawns if you want, and enjoy as we delve further into Elden Ring. Oh, and by the way, I feel like I just need to say this. If you don't believe anything I say in this video, that's completely warranted, and actually, I implore you, go out and do it yourself and come to your own conclusions. And hell, I already had a shit back before, but I'm sure leaning over the screen trying to decipher this didn't help it at all, so be prepared. If you do go and try and translate this, you're probably going to go and look like the Hunchback of Notre Dame. If I only had the transcriptions of the runes from a year ago, I'd be stumped, confused as to what all this meant. And with this new translation from the Spirit Calling Bell comes a lot more understanding of Elden Ring's world. I'm not going to go over every single part, simply because it would take way too long, and unfortunately, a lot is comprised of a language made specifically for Elden Ring, I like to call Elden Futhark. The same kind of language, I believe, is also scattered across the map obelisks, while the other parts are unintelligible, which I honestly think is intentional. A lot of these runes look like they were inscribed by toddlers. Not saying they actually were, but I do think it was intentional that they were designed like this. Perhaps it's to symbolise that the inscriptions were made in a rush, or perhaps the person doesn't have very good knowledge of the language. Regardless of that, if you wish to see the full transcription, it will be in the Google Docs link pinned in the pinned comment and in the description. The first point I'd like to talk about is the similarities. All over the map obelisks and the spirit calling bells are mentions of ice, giants and soul. The giant corpses are located all over Caelid and the mountaintop of the giants. And since Elden Ring's release, to say people have been stumped would absolutely be an understatement, and yet I believe the answer lies here. Given the same language and manner of runes on the map obelisks and the spirit calling bells, I am certain whoever wrote these texts probably was some kind of follower of these giants. Considering both texts point towards ice giants, a race of giants never mentioned, and yet coincidentally the giant corpses who look to be ancestors of the fire giants also happen to be unnamed, leading me to believe absolutely these giants are the ice giants. But if these are the ice giants, what is their story and how did they come to their fate? If your answer was war, then I'm sorry to say it probably was not the kind of war you were imagining. Instead, I believe it was a war against nature. A few weeks back I came across the mountaintop of the giants map. In its description it talks about a mountain to the east which loomed over the mountaintop of the giants. Yet if you go there in game there is no trace of this mountain, so where is it? I redid the combination of Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree's map and the base game and I come up with this. I believe this is the true map, and this is what it looked like before Marika separated the lands between and the lands of Shadow. And before you say how the suppressing tower is in the centre, honestly I think it's more likely that at one point in time that point was the centre and it shifted. Obviously we don't know how Elden Ring's world works, but we know our world and its landmass definitely moves. Why should this be any different? We know George R.R. Martin, who worked on the backstory for Elden Ring, does like to take inspiration from the real world. You might now be wondering how on earth this has anything to do with the giants, and the answer actually lies in the landmass which appears now connecting Caelid and the mountaintop of the giants. Given an answer as to how the giants are both in Caelid and the mountaintop of the giants. If this truly is the case, how on earth did they die? And I believe the answer lies with the Jagged Peak. The Jagged Peak is known to spew magma, but not to a major extent, leading me to believe it's semi-dormant. But what left it semi-dormant? I believe it was a massive eruptions, which I believe killed the giants. How the ice giants died reminds me heavily of the eruption of Pompeii and how the inhabitants were incinerated in an instant, leaving imprints of people living their normal lives. These giants do not look like they died fighting. They look like they had no idea what was going on. And let's be real, what on earth would have been big enough to beat these guys in single combat? Now, whether this eruption happened by its own accord or as a part of some sort of scheme, I don't know. I'm really curious what you all think on that point. A hole you might see in this theory lies in the fact no ice giants are found between the lands of Caelid and the mountaintop of the giants. This is where we go more into the batshit insane theory lane. We know Marika separated the lands between the lands of Shadow, but I feel there's more at play. If a volcano erupted enough to cross the lands of Shadow and reach Caelid and the mountains of the giants and kill the ice giants, then most likely the whole of the lands of Shadow's area would have been annihilated, left to become a molten wasteland covering the corpses of whatever inhabited the area, including the ice giants. And in time, new life would flourish, and eons later the Hornsump would arrive and set the story as we know it in this new lush land. And yet the Lands Between area shows no sign of this destruction. Hell, the giants which are supposedly deep underground in the Lands of Shadow are there for the world to see. How is that possible? Marika is the god with the power of an outer god, or a false outer god if you're going down that route. It seems to me from all evidence given that Marika set the clocks back to the exact time these ice giants died, when she split the Lands of Shadow and the Lands Between. This explains the completely different areas compared to the Lands of Shadow, even considering they are connected in a twisted roundabout way. It also explains why exactly these giants, which nobody seems to confess to knowing anything about, are still in the Lands Between. A lot of people as of late have been talking about the convolution of time in Elden Ring and how it's similar to Dark Souls 3, and I agree. Marika seems to have fucked up the timeline beyond repair, and this is the consequence. A world of the past which marches forward with the people from the present. This would also explain how this all came to be. If she turned the clock back on the land but not the people, people of the new Lands Between would be able to examine these corpses, which never would have been possible, forming a new language dedicated to them. Perhaps this enigmatic group were followers of the icy ghost flame. Both are linked to the cold and both are enigmatic. I also don't think it's a coincidence the runes are on the spirit calling bell which summons spirits, something very similar to what the ghost flame does. On the topic of how they don't remember, maybe it was an Adam and Eve situation with the addition of perhaps one or two ice giants to breed and then make the fire giant, dying, leaving the annals of time before the histories once more recorded, leaving those who knew the truth to die with it, their descendants only knowing bits and pieces, every generation becoming more and more disconnected to the truth of the world. The whole discussion also explains the erdtree. Without looking at this theory, it makes no sense how there is two great trees, the erdtree and the shadow tree, considering at one point in time they were bound together in the same land. If we look at it like this theory, it makes a hell of a lot more sense. The erdtree is a little parasite on the great tree, which is said to be the origins of the Crucible. Yet the Lands Between area is not home to a great hordes of Crucible beings like the Lands of Shadow, where it seems to have been more common to be Crucible touched than being normal like people are in the Lands Between. Is it so far-fetched to think, due to the truth being lost through time and generations, people will resort to hatred for the Crucible touched beings, forgetting that apart from appearances they were exactly the same and not the hideous monsters they grew up hearing about? Perhaps that's why when the inhabitants of the Lands Between entered the Lands of Shadow, they decapitated Marika statues. Perhaps for the first time in an eon, they knew the cold truth hidden for an age behind a shadowy veil. If that didn't make any sense to you whatsoever, which I really don't blame you, to sum it up in the point of the erdtree and the shadow tree, I believe that the shadow tree and the erdtree, at least their actual body, are the same tree, just at different points in the timeline, explaining how there can be a shadow tree and an erdtree all at once. I believe the world that we see in the Lands of Shadow, if it was to progress further in the Lands Between, that is what it would eventually look like. Plus, this also lends credence to the theory that the Lands Between the Lands of Shadow, their landmass can move. For if the Lands of Shadow erdtree is all the way over there, that means it must have moved at some point in time. This has been added in post-recording, as I completely forgot to say, but another thing that lends credence to the fact the shadow tree and the erdtree are the same is the remembrances. You can both go to Nia for the shadow tree remembrances and the erdtree remembrances, which further lends credence to the fact they are the same tree. If this is true, it leaves open a new slot for a new dynasty, aka, I believe, the Ice Giants. Coincidentally, the spirit calling bell also talks of ulcers obsessively. The only enemy I know to have a common interest with ulcers is the ulcerated tree spirits, who coincidentally drop golden seeds from the erdtree / the lands between great tree. Also, the ulcerated tree spirit is claimed by no one to be of the golden order, and although it does have a bit of death going around it at some points, especially when it spawns in, it is claimed by no one. And considering the whole ulcer topic, I'm pretty damn sure they are a part of the Ice Giants order, becoming one of the last bastions of the Old Age. It's also entirely possible Marika finished off those who lived in that time period, eliminating those who threatened her reign. It certainly would not be out of character. Miquella also makes so much more sense now. The map obelisk and the spirit calling bell talk of solar ice, aka sun ice, which sounds a lot like an eclipse. Miquella wants to revive Godwyn by using the eclipse, which now makes sense considering the connection between these texts and the time being set back. Perhaps his goal all along was to revive Godwyn by using the same method Marika set the time of the lands between back. Sadly everyone, that is the end of the video. If you did enjoy the video, please consider leaving a like and subscribe, as it greatly helps the channel. I really enjoyed translating this, and I really hope you did enjoy this video too. I'm going to try and not ramble any longer. So friends, don't you dare go hollow, and may you find your worth in the waking world. Goodbye everyone.